Sometimes even good people can make a mistake. And when it happens, it's one of the most intense and emotional experiences of your life. It could be a DUI, or maybe you were in the wrong place with the wrong people at the wrong time. Or perhaps you just did something stupid at the spur of the moment without even thinking, and now you're in trouble with the law. Well, you need experienced legal help right away so you don't become a victim of the criminal justice system. Even good people can make a mistake, and if you, a friend, or a loved one has been accused of a crime, don't make another mistake by hiring the wrong attorney for the kind of help you need. You need to visit toddjohnslaw.com. That's toddjohnslaw.com, and then call Attorney Todd Johns today. Attorney Todd Johns has decades of experience helping good people like you who have made mistakes or bad decisions and will stand by you every step of the way. toddjohnslaw.com.
All right. Hello. Welcome to That's Enough Out of You. I am your host, Bill Rader. And joining me, my co-host, Sean Kane. Sean, how are you today?
Billy Raids, how you doing, buddy?
Doing great. Doing great. Couldn't be better. With all the pollen in the air and the allergies killing me. This is what happens in springtime in Northeast PA. But
well, you're rocking the big shirt there, buddy. That's available on our merch store.
There you go. There you go. That's enough out of you. There's me. There's you. Holding
Looking good, buddy. Looking good.
Yep.
We got a big guest today.
Yeah. Big guest. Big guest.
Big guest. R.J. Rogers, the author of the book, The Don, Bill, and the 36 Rules of the Bosses. And what a fascinating conversation this was. R.J. really just a great guy. And this was a fascinating conversation, Bill, because, you know, we tie his book, like, how does it fit in real life?
Right.
You know, with a lot of these like CEO types and everything. And he talked about how, you know, to become a Cosa Nostra boss, you basically got to break every one of
these. Got to break the rules. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like if you follow these rules, you'll end up staying a soldier, never moving up, and probably end up getting whacked or prison for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to talk to him. I know his podcast is very popular. And the podcast he does with
Mikey Scars.
I'm sorry, the name just escaped me for a second. And you know, talking to he's talked to a lot of these guys and
yeah, real life Mafia members that he talked to. So I mean, you know, he has a lot of great insight into it. And we talked a lot about John Gotti in this because of course Mikey Scars worked for John Gotti.
Right.
And we talked about you know, the one name that came up is a name that a lot of people probably won't know, and that's Joe Watts, a very powerful associate. He was a Welsh gangster. He wasn't a made guy, but he had the ear of the boss. He had John's ear, and he was very, very powerful. And he told some stories about Joe Watts, how powerful he was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for you guys to hear this and see it. So, Sean, anything else before we get to it?
No, let's get right into it, buddy. This was
all right. All right. Without further ado, here is our interview with R.J. Roger. All right. R.J. Roger, welcome to That's Enough Out of You.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. RJ, if you could just give a quick bio of yourself and talk about your great book, The Don, and then your podcast as well.
Yeah. So a little about me. I started off, it's funny that I'm in podcasting because it was never a plan. Never thought I'd be, hosting a show or doing a podcast. But I was always just a writer. I enjoyed writing. And then after I wrote the book, and my agent said, the new world is different. You have to be out. You have to do media. You got to do podcasting and all this. And I got into podcasting just through recommendation of my agent, never thinking it would ever become what it became. I just started out on YouTube telling stories and more theory-based stories, philosophical look at organized crime. And so I started one channel, Black Handprint Mafia, and built that one up. And then through that channel, I met Mikey Scars former captain in the Gambino family. He helped to run the Gambino family with John Gotti Jr. After John Gotti Sr. and Sammy the Bull were off the streets, he's the guy that took all Sammy the Bull's stuff. Not took it, but he inherited the rackets that Sammy was over after Sammy flipped. So him and I started the show. It's been really successful. We did a good job. We have a huge Patreon, very successful Patreon channel. We started on YouTube and, and all streaming platforms. And then after maybe like 2 years ago, we moved over to subscription only, which is where most of our shows come out now. As far as the book was just a, it was a long process. I started the book 13 years ago, and it just came out now. So it took a long time to research, 3 years of research and writing, and then 4 years to find an agent, and then 6 more years to finish it and find a publisher. So it's my lifetime achieving project. I'm really proud of it. It's not cookie cutter. This isn't one of them things where I just threw something together. This book has my life and my blood inside of it. So I'm really proud of the book.
RJ,
Well,
where'd you get
tremendous book? Go ahead, Billy.
Yeah, your research? Where did you look for things? Where were you finding things to put in the book?
Well, I've listened to hundreds of hours of audio and recordings. I've read hundreds and hundreds of essays and articles. I've read probably every book that's available. I'm not a street guy, so all my stuff is just, researching through available material, FBI documents, reading testimonies, court documents, traveling to locations, talking to people who lived in different neighborhoods. So my research was just, this wasn't like some kind of like thing I dreamed my whole life. I was just sitting on my couch in my basement, and I was watching Casino, and when I was 27, and this Joe Pesci character did this like crazy thing that you would look at and be like, wow, that is so crazy what he just did. But it's something, it was a really intricate like thing that you could really learn from at the same time. So at the surface, it was like, that's crazy. But when you thought about it, you could say, wow, you can learn something from that and apply it to your own life. And it just hit me. It just hit me. And I said, I wonder what else these like gangsters, these mob guys do that regular people could learn from. And I always had an interest in the subject, but never planned on writing about it. And as soon as that hit me, I just felt it. I felt that it was something I was supposed to do. And that became the next 3-4 years of my life, just researching and writing.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, RJ, and this book is fantastic. It's really a great read, and we have it up on our bookshop, so anybody wants to get it, it's fantastic. But like you said, you could apply these to real life. A lot of these, you have 36 rules here. And one of the interesting things you said is that, to applying it just to Cosa Nostra, really to become a boss, you have to break every one of these rules. Like if you obey all these rules, you probably end up never getting past being a soldier and probably end up getting whacked or in prison.
The funny thing is that what I found in my research is that there's a major difference between how a boss thinks and how everybody else in the family thinks. So a captain or a soldier, they think very different. They think more in line with the rules. That's why they stay in that position their whole life. Right. And, the moral of the story, really, of my theory is that we're not that different. When you start talking about power and people who are aspirants and ambitious, and they want to rise to a real high level in life, it can be the legit or the illegit, but these people go about things in a different way. And the rules are set to maintain order, but order keeps you kind of at a position that you want to rise out of. And if you look in life, even in the legitimate world, people that make it to the highest positions, there are people who break the rules. They don't go with the traditional teachings, the traditional models. They break rules so they can set rules. And the ultimate rule you're most of the time going to have to break. In the Mafia, the rule is a boss is untouchable. You can't kill a boss. most bosses became a boss by killing their boss.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
And these rules, you could apply these rules to a CEO, almost any CEO, captain of industry, like you said. I mean, they all bring even the guy in the White House.
Think
Had
about,
to get that in.
but really think about Trump. Donald Trump is a great example, and I think that Donald Trump is so much like the people I've studied in this book. I mean, if you look at it in a figurative way, in a way that you look at it in an allegorical way, he's almost in every rule. And you know, but if you look at him, for example, he was an outsider. He's wasn't some guy that had long political connections. He was he broke every norm and tradition to become president. But even the way he politicked, traditionally you don't call someone a liar flat out. Traditionally you act like you comport yourself with a level of decorum and what they call acting presidential. Let's say, we never seen someone go about being a president the way he went about it. He broke all the rules to become president.
Well,
And
I mean,
it worked.
yeah, it should have been over at grab him by the pussy, right? That should have been it. And that seemed to launch him into the stratosphere instead of ending it. That really seemed to, like, I don't understand. If it was anybody else, that would have been the end of their political career right then and there.
It's a double-edged sword in the way I look at it, because I think we have become, and you guys know because you guys are doing media and podcasting, that you can be, censorship's a real thing. We get, things are more and more watered down. We have to be so worried about what we say. You can be cancel culture to a certain extent, pushed, it irked a lot of people. So what happens when you become too extreme on one end? You force all these people to
Exactly.
be accepting of an extreme on another end. So you start getting. So now when you say grab him by the pussy, you can now say, well, at least he's real. So you get these labels that are really not. It's just blanketing. It's blanketing someone's desire to just not be politically correct all the time, being able to not, someone that has the courage to fight against this. So in many ways, I think it helped him, because Trump is really good at taking a negative and running into it and using it and turning it into a positive. He doesn't ever say, I'm sorry. He doesn't buckle to pressure. He's not going to say, I really shouldn't. It would have hurt him to say, hey guys, I'm really sorry. I really shouldn't have said that. It was that would have made him look like all the other guys. But people go, yeah, they're so happy to have someone that just fight against it. And that's where he's kind of good. In the eyes of how some people think, is that this guy's a fighter. This guy don't buckle to the establishment.
Right. Yeah. Well, and RJ, it certainly harkens back to the days of, John Gotti, and every time he would win one of these trials or it would get thrown out, there would be parties, there would be celebrating. The whole neighborhood would celebrate when he would come back. And that, that I think it's sort of that anti-hero, right? It's the guy that you want to root for because he's sticking it to the man. He's getting away with, he's doing things that you wouldn't be able to do. And I think that has a lot to do. I think that there's a strong parallel there.
And that's one of my rules in the book. Respect your public, rule 29. And you don't become a mafia boss because you're like overly concerned with the public. But you notice John Gotti he did parades and he shot fireworks in the air, and he helped the local businesses. And if you couldn't pay your rent, he would help you, and he would do hot dogs and popcorn. And what you find with a lot of people, you even see it in big industry, legitimate business, like they'll do, like, we're giving this much money to this major, to this nonprofit, or we're giving out turkeys and all this stuff. Courting the public is helpful when you do something evil, because you get people to say, well, he's a good guy. He did all this for us, all this for us. But he really did a lot of things that you don't know about that are,
Right.
he's actually using you. So when you see a lot of elite people, you notice they can be doing evil, but they always try to do something. Why do they hire PR people? Why do they do all this? They do it because it was John Gotti wanted those cars being flipped over outside the courtroom. He wanted the public to rise up to help him when he was facing life in prison. And it's a common thing you see, especially in the criminal world. A lot of people will sell drugs all over their community, but then on Turkey Day, they give out all the free turkeys and the free food. And you get the public to forget, yeah, this is the guy that's flooding our whole community with drugs. And he's the guy who's killing everybody. But you're happy because you got a new bicycle for Johnny and you got a stuffed bird for your family on Thanksgiving.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You don't realize, with a guy like John Gotti, he's the reason you're paying, 40% more for your garbage or your clothes or whatever, because he's, they own the garbage industry. They own all the garments and everything. And you know what I mean? It's just, it's crazy. It again, goes back to that anti-hero thing where it's like, you don't really care, what he does. You're going to root for him. And like you said, the more evil things that he does, it seems to make him more popular.
Yeah. The one thing I find about a lot of people who are in positions of power, and what the mob did better than any other crime group, because we have a way of looking at the mafia that with a sense of acceptance, that we don't look at black and brown gangs, that we don't look at MS-13, we don't look at the cartels, we don't look at the Crips or the Bloods or street gangs in Chicago. We're very much like, we got to get the crime off the street, but people rooted for the mafia. What the mob did well was they dressed like a businessman. They were wearing suits and ties. They were very charming, charismatic. They kissed the hands of Mrs. Mary. They said, hey, she don't have to pay. They were good at courting the public better than anyone else. They were like the sexy, beautiful gangster, the guy that looked tough and willing to fight and take on whatever. He looked like just someone you wanted to be like. Nice combed back hair. They dressed up a dirty thing better than the other. You see a guy with his pants around his ass, that's not that inspiring.
Right. You're right.
That's true. That's definitely
but
true.
the thing about it is they are the same in what they do. They corrupt, they prey upon society. That's what crime groups do. They corrupt the system that regular people have to operate within. They corrupted politicians. They corrupted police officers. They corrupted the system that's put in place to protect the common or the everyday guy.
Right.
And so you're all the same. It's just lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
One of the things that's interesting about your book is, a lot of people, when they think about the mafia, they think that everybody in the mafia is super rich and wealthy. But the soldiers, a lot of the soldiers, really, they're like the common guy living paycheck to paycheck. It's going in one door and going out the other. They're kicking up a lot to the capo, give to their boss. So, a lot of these guys, these associates coming up and soldiers, they're not rich. They're just like the common guy living paycheck to paycheck.
One of my favorite films done on the mob is the Donnie Brasco film. And the reason is because it showed really what it's like being in the mob for over 90% of everybody that's a made guy in the mafia.
Right.
The way the Lefty character was portrayed, he's living in a little apartment. He never has any money. He's always trying to get a dollar here, a dollar there.
Hustling.
So the mafia, yes, at a time was a big, rich organization, but it's no different. Like if you go get a job at a company and the company is $100 million company, well, you work in it, but you make $20 an hour. And there's guys at the very top, a few guys that make, the CEOs making $1 million, $2 million a year. Then you got a series of vice presidents that are making 4 or 5 guys that are getting really rich. But and then you have middle guys, like what we call capo regimes or captains in the mafia, that would be like an executive in a major corporation, and they're getting a little 6-figure salary, but they're not even super rich. But then everybody beneath that is struggling, and the mob is the same way. It's no different than any big corporation.
Oh,
It's big, but a lot of the people don't have nothing. And being in the mob is not. It would be comparable to having a very low paying job. A lot of guys have nothing. A lot of guys have nothing. That's why when they get arrested, they can't pay bail. They can't pay a lawyer. They're stuck in prison. They get no help. Their families go on welfare. A lot of street life is very low paying. People don't realize that. A lot of people think that you get into the streets or something, you're making a lot of money. No, it's actually probably comparable. When you break the hours down, it's probably like working for like McDonald's, like $7 an hour. It'd be like making minimum wage.
Yeah. Well, Sean, you said paycheck to paycheck, but it's not even that. It's if they were getting a paycheck, it would be one thing, but they don't make money unless they they do something, unless they score or whatever, right?
You got to kick it up.
Exactly. But they have to do something in order to make that money. Like they got to rob somebody, or they got to, get collection money, or, protection money from their collections, or, whatever. I mean, they have to actually go out and do something. They're basically independent contractors.
Absolutely. I'll give you a good example, because Mikey Scars was very big in the mafia. So the Gambino family is set unless the commission has voted and changed it. But the rules that we have known from the time he left the life was that there's 260 made guys maximum that the Gambino family can have. So, and what he explained to me is, and now you can't ever, even if someone's in prison or someone cooperated and they're in hiding, until that guy's dead, you can't fill that slot.
That seems like an arbitrary number. What's 260? What's the significance of that number?
Those were the numbers that they were set. So it was like the Gambinos and the Genovese, they were right around 260. Then each family has a number, and you can't make more than that number.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been set for a long time. But like Michael told me, so if the Gambino family, he said this on our show, there's 25 captains, 25 capos in the family at the time. So of that 260, he said the family functions on about 60 people, makes the whole thing run. And everybody else is like fringe guys. They're not turning in money. They're not making any money. They're made, but could be a guy who works at a coffee shop or drives a truck. He's made in the family, but he's not critical to the family running. So it's about, and there's 25 captains, but there's like 8 captains that are important to the family. So of the whole mafia, the whole Gambino family, up until at least when he was there until 2002, about 8 captains and 60 guys brought all the money in and made the whole family function. And that's how all the families are set up that way. So there's a nucleus of guys that make the money. And it's not as structured. It's more loose than people think. The films make it look very rigid, very structured, and it's really not. It's really not.
We will be right back. DK's Corner, now located at 201 Cherry Street in Jessup, Pennsylvania, is serving up the area's best tasting food at respectable prices. Known for our great cheesesteaks, DK's also has delicious breakfast sandwiches, specialty coffees, and catering 7 days a week. You'll love the wraps, soups, and pizza too. We're now open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Visit DK's Corner on Facebook to see our daily specials, and make sure to follow and like us while you're there. We offer local delivery to homes and businesses, takeout, or come and dine in our new restaurant in Jessup. Call or text DK's Corner at 570-209-0278, or hit us up on DoorDash. And we thank DK's Corner for sponsoring That's Enough Out of You. And we would like to thank our sponsor, Gracious Day Grains. Sean, you like to eat healthy, don't you?
Always, buddy. I try to eat healthy as much as I can.
Yeah, and there is nothing healthier than what they call like farm to table, right? So when you can get something right from the ground and make it and then put it right on your table, And Gracious Day Grains, they have a tremendous selection, and it's totally organic. Everything is, they don't use any sort of herbicides or pesticides or anything like that. They have a bunch of different products on their website, Gracious Day Grains. So if you go to graciousdaymilling.com, you'll find a bunch of great stuff there, Sean.
Yeah, you will, Billy. And it's owned by Tom Maxey, who's a great guy from Virginia. He's a truth seeker, just like me and you, buddy. And Tom's growing philosophy follows the wisdom of farmers of centuries past. And a quote from Tom is, "If we practice the right rotations, we exclude the bugs and weeds without needing herbicides or pesticides." So, I mean, this is great, Billy. I mean, what he's doing is fantastic.
There's cornbread mix, there's cornmeal, popcorn he sells, buckwheat Sean, have you had buckwheat pancakes?
No, buddy.
Oh my, they're delicious. I love buckwheat pancakes. And Gracious Day Grains sells buckwheat pancakes. Just go to their website and you'll be able to find all of this stuff there. You can order it right off the website. You can find out all about how they farm and their whole philosophy. Tom's philosophy is great stuff.
It really is, Billy. And one of the things he does is he grinds small batches at very low temperatures, which retains the flavor and the freshness.
Of course, and it can't get any fresher than that. I mean, it's literally right from the ground. So again, go to graciousdaymilling.com and just take a look on there. You can order whatever you want, and they'll send it right to your door. Again, it doesn't get any fresher than that, right from Tom's farm to your door to your table. So
absolutely. And eat healthy, and you'll feel better.
Absolutely. I wish I could do that. I wish I could eat healthier, Sean.
We'll start with Tom's stuff, buddy.
I'm going to order some of those buckwheat pancakes. I love.
There you go. I'm going to try them too, Billy.
Yeah, they're really good. All right, Gracious Day. We thank Gracious Day Grains for their sponsorship.
Thank you.
One difference between the Mafia and like a regular corporation is the boss doesn't pay the employees. The employees are the ones kicking up to the bosses.
The whole family runs through kicking up. And the higher you get, the less you have to essentially do, because your money's just coming in through the hard work of the guy beneath you.
Exactly.
And that's the thing in the mob. You earn your way. It isn't like, Joe Valachi testified that, he thought New York should have did it more like the way Chicago was doing it. And Chicago was given like a small amount of, like a stipend, essentially, a little bit of money. It wasn't a lot, but enough that you had something in your pocket every week. But in New York, he said this. He said, in New York, they'll just let you starve. That's what Joe Valachi said.
Talk a little bit about the history, Sicily and Italy, because a lot of people just don't understand that, the Sicilians never really trusted the Italians. Can you kind of explain that history?
Yeah, so Sicily was his own place. It wasn't a part of Italy for a long time. And Sicily was always, Sicily was a very conquered place. A lot of people tried to come in and invade Sicily and take the land and take their valuables and stuff like that. So Sicilians historically have been very distrusting of outsiders. They didn't trust anybody. They didn't trust the Italians no more than they trusted the French or anybody else. They were just looked at like people trying to conquer, people trying to invade. That's why a lot of times you don't hear Sicilians call themselves Italians. You might hear it more today in a young Sicilian, but if you're probably I'd say 45 or 50 years and up, you're still on that mindset that I'm Sicilian. It was, so like to be Sicilian was like you wouldn't call yourself Italian.
Right.
But so they were just distrusting of everybody. And that's where the Cosa Nostra was kind of formed. There was like a secret government where, hey, we'll handle our own things. You got a problem, you come through us and we handle it. And to be honest, it kind of started off as a good thing. It was a protection against invaders, against outsiders, people trying to steal your land, corrupt politicians in Palermo. They were saying, let's just protect ourselves and we'll So, and then as anything, most things that are corrupt started off with good intentions. It's just the human nature part kicks in and
Yeah.
greed kicks in. And the mob became like everything else where it started to become big money starts coming in. And now you got greedy people who want more of the pie and it stops being shared and things like that. There was enough money in the mafia and in each family that everybody who was made, nobody really should have had to starve
No.
and be hungry.
Yeah. Before I want to get into some of the rules specifically, but the last thing is talk to me a little bit about how a lot of these mob bosses, and not just mob bosses, but CEOs and power brokers, captain of industry, they read and follow the philosophy of Machiavelli's The Prince. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's you can talk to, and I've talked to people who, me and my partner Michael talked about this before, but a lot of guys in the life made a point to read that book. And if you went to prison, did any kind of stretch in prison, you read the book while you were in jail. A lot of guys read the book the first time in jail. But when you go back to like the Carlo Gambino era and everything from him backwards, it was almost like a recommended read. It was like you have to read. And the theory of Machiavelli is power by any means. And the ends justify the means. And whatever it takes for you to gain power, even if it means killing the guy who taught you everything. And the Prince, Machiavelli, talks about, after, the guy. So if you're like a young up and coming guy and you meet an older guy and he's taught you how to use a sword, he's taught you to be a great swordsman, and you've learned everything you could learn from him. There's nothing now. He's just in your way. Because you should just cut his head off and take everything that he has. And the mob can be very similar. A lot of times, guys turn on their best friends, and but if you look at that's why I use so much Machiavelli in the book. So that wasn't the original plan. I did my research, and I was just talking to my agent, and I said to him, the mob historically has really researched and read Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince. He said, really? I said, yeah, 100%. A lot of the way they operate came out of that book. Well, he said, well, you have this 36 rule theory. How do I know it's accurate? I said, it's accurate. He goes, well, if they studied the Machiavelli, then your rules in some way should all be in his book. So he said, don't call me. I'm not answering the phone until you go read the book and you find me one example of all 36 rules inside the Prince. So that's why in the book, you see next to each rule has a quote from Machiavelli that aligns with my rule.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the rules. So rule number 5 is one that I want to talk about, mix with the soldiers, because I think that's one thing that led to the downfall of Paul Castellano. He kind of he didn't mix with the soldiers, right? And he kind of distanced himself from the lower level guys, and they didn't see him that much. So it was the guy, it was a guy like John Gotti who they more embraced.
No, you're spot on. And sometimes these like guys that a long time in the life, long lineage guys, they start getting very wealthy, a lot of money. You start distancing yourself from people. You start feeling above them in many ways. And you start wanting, that's really what took, there's a new movie out, Auto Nights, where
we did a show on that. We had Tony DeStefano on.
Okay.
Tony.
And Auto Nights really draws that comparison. Costello, they showed a scene where Costello didn't come to the gathering with Vito when he first came back from Italy. And what they're showing is just this Costello is distancing himself more and more and more and more. He doesn't want to be interfaced with these guys. He became so worried about protecting himself and not protecting the family, not protecting the people who have sworn oath to him. So mixing with the soldiers, and even in the legitimate world, if you don't see your boss, you don't feel led. Most people need to be led. That's what I've learned in life. When you start talking about 85% of people, in this country. And my theory in general is that there's if you put 100 people in the room, 10 of them will come to the front of the room, and they're natural leaders that they just end up there. But 90% are sitting there saying, "So where are we going, guys?" And they need someone to follow. And when you don't see a guy leading you or advising you or helping you, you don't feel an allegiance to him. And that gives perfect opportunity for this new guy to come in. So Paul, he didn't want to be around. I mean, Paul was distancing himself. He sat up in this big house with all this money while guys had nothing.
White House.
Yeah. And John Gotti is just a regular guy living in Queens in a little house. And, he's there. He's talking to you. He don't care if you're made, if you're not made. He made himself loved and appreciated by the soldiers. And the soldiers will align with who touches them, with who's there with them, with who they can see.
Right. It's like that scene, Sean, from the Gotti movie when Neil
Gotti, yeah.
when Neil Delacroix died, and Gotti said, Castellano didn't even come say goodbye.
Yep, that's and that made a lot of people upset.
Yeah,
it made a lot of people very mad. You're in this family. It don't matter that the cops are looking at you or anything. You pay respect to the people. To people you've worked with, people who are your brothers. Remember, they say we're an honored society. It's a brotherhood. It's this, it's that. But when you don't show up and you don't come around, you're telling me something. You're telling me what you think about me.
And I think another thing is a lot of guys probably felt that, Castellano never really paid his dues. He was never really considered like a street guy. He was Carlo's brother-in-law, right? And he just kind of, was kind of this white collar guy, and he never was a street guy coming up. So a lot of them probably didn't respect him.
In the book, I break down the theory of cooking pot and maid, and there's two types of bosses: the cooking pot boss versus the maid boss. And the maid boss, how I break it down, is a guy that he comes behind his father, or he comes through some kind of lineage. He comes through, and Paul's father was a maid guy in the family. He had Paul comes out of an upper middle class background. He didn't come from the streets. He didn't come from the dirty alleyways of Bensonhurst. He came from he's a what they call like a rite of passage guy. He's getting in no matter what because who his father was and because of his name, and the Castellanos go back long time. So he's a little more pampered guy. But the cooking pot guy, he's a guy who had no information, no connections, no lineage, nobody. He had to get there through bloody knuckles, through a fight, through relationship building, through someone trusting him, and my theory is whenever those two guys come up and there's a problem between the two, the cooking pot guy is always going to take him down because he's so trained. He has such hard training in the streets. If you guys become a, top media outlet, top podcast, and one day you're done and you just say, "Hey, son, we have it set up. We got the following. We're going to start bringing you on and you're going to take over the show." They didn't have to go through the grind that you had to go through. Right. They can't understand the things know. So they're just kind of inheriting it a little bit. And people like the self-made guy. Self-made is a great story.
Well, you see that with regular businesses. I mean, a guy builds a business and then, it's successful. And then when he's done, he hands it off to the kids and the kids don't want no part of it and it goes under. You see that happen all the time.
There you go. And the second generation, the kid that didn't have to worry about, he's now, the business is solid. They got good revenue. They can count a really great customer base. He's too pampered. His dad was knocking on doors, stressing at night, remortgaging the house, selling valuable things, playing with the kids' college fund that he was saving because he has to use that to pay suppliers. He is a different mindset person that the kids just can never understand. And there's no way to get the cooking pot training. The cooking pot boss, you can't understand him unless you were in that alleyway and you smelled the dirty urine and the dirty, you were in the mix of gunfire. You were in a war. You can't understand what it's like sleeping on a mattress in a tenement, fighting in the Costa Limerese War. You have to have been there. Right. And those guys are different guys, I find. There's an extraordinary strength in the guy that starts completely with nothing.
RJ,
Go ahead, Bill. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I want to ask a question. Sean and I had this conversation when we were talking about the Castellano murder. And it was something that Sammy the Bull had said on his podcast. And that was kind of, they didn't necessarily want Gotti to be the boss. I think that the sentiment, at least according to Sammy, was that, Frank DeCicco probably would have been the best guy to take over. But Gotti kind of took, he took the reins, and he kind of stepped up, obviously, and put this whole thing together. What's your opinion on that?
Nah, John Gotti was huge way before 1985 when they killed Paul.
Sure.
John Gotti was one of the most respected captains in New York before he was known to the whole public. This guy was a superstar. People seen it in him early. Michael Scars tells a story how he first met John. So Paul Castellano had an edict on drugs, and he wanted every captain in the family to know, you deal, you die. John went around to all the captains and in the family, one by one or two at a time, to say, hey, you deal, you die. If you get caught, you're getting killed. Paul don't want no drug dealing. When John is introduced to Mikey Scars, hey, this is Mikey Scars. This is our next boss. That's what they introduced John. John's just the captain. Paul just became boss. This is the 70s. Paul just became boss. Carlo just died. They said, this is John Gotti, our next boss.
Oh, wow.
So that's how long. Think about this. John Gotti was not made yet. Charlie Wagons goes to jail. John Gotti was originally in that like Ozone Park Bergen crew, the Queens crew, let's say. John Gotti was acting captain, which means he's the boss over made men, and he wasn't even made yet.
Wow.
That's unheard of.
Yeah.
It's unheard of. So no, I disagree. I think that no, I don't believe that. I think John was a super respected guy. I went into the old Raven night. I told this story before. This is a crazy story, but it was a shoe store at the time I went in. The Raven night in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And I go in I see shoes everywhere, and I didn't know at the time it was a shoe store. I just go in, I see the lady. I said, "This is a shoe store?" Yeah. I said, "Do you know what this place is?" Yes, I know. Everyone comes in, she's like annoyed and stuff. But I get to talking to her. I said, "You can make this." She says to me, she told me a story. People come, her floor is like broken up. People come in there, because it's the original white tile that John Gotti walked on.
Oh, wow.
They break her floor.
Oh, jeez.
And say, this is the floor John Gotti walked on. They'll break a piece of towel off the floor, hand her $20. I'm sorry, I didn't break your floor. They used to. She told me stories about people coming in there holding like an oxygen tank. An old man come in, tears coming down his face. He got down on the floor, kissed the floor, get up, and say, "This is the floor John Gotti walked on." People loved John Gotti. They really. Sammy. Hey, that's his opinion. I'm not going to call him a liar, but the people I've talked to, research I've done, John Gotti was a superstar. He really was. Now, the bosses, they didn't really like, I would say the bosses didn't really like him a whole lot while he was the boss of the family. He killed a sitting boss without commission approval.
Yeah.
He went about things in a way that was not, it was like, he was like the Donald Trump of the mob, like where he just did it. He did it how he wanted to do it. He didn't go with the normal way that it was supposed to go.
Yeah, definitely. One of the rules that's really interesting is rule number 34: live modestly. Because when you think about it, though, a lot of the bosses that their reign was really long is the ones that really followed that. Where a guy like local guy here, Russell Buffalino, ran the family here for a long time, and he's a guy that he kind of just portrayed himself as this middle class guy, kind of going around, like he didn't kind of stayed to that type, and you think of like a Tony Accardo in Chicago, kind of stayed in the shadows, used the front bosses, and then you think of the guys that are a little bit more flamboyant, like and a little bit more flashy in the money, like an Al Capone or a John Gotti. Their reign isn't that long compared to those guys that,
Yeah. So, like, Carlo Gambino had more money than God. He could have bought a house. He could have bought a house anywhere. He had that little home in Brooklyn, little row home where everybody could see him. He didn't show, look at all I got. You guys got nothing. When you have so much and everybody else around you has so little, the fattest pig is the first to be pushed into the slaughterhouse. They chop the fat pig up first. And so, but the people, especially in general, I would say this is a principle that could be applied just to life. But when you're in crime, if you're in a crime group, you do not want to be flashing all this money and all people ever see you doing is sitting at a social club having espresso and cannolis. You don't want to have all that heat in the public, from the public and from the investigators and from politicians. Everyone's wondering, how are you getting all this?
Right.
So you kind of want to, relax. As boss, you're most effective if you understand that your wealth is just in your power. You are a sitting boss. You are like a god to these guys. Swear an oath to leave their child on their deathbed if I call.
Right.
You can do whatever you want. You literally, truly have the power of life and death. That has to be enough for you. You don't have to go out here and buy all this stuff and get out and do all these things. And the simple bosses are the ones that just kind of keep a low profile, stay quiet, stay modest. They have real long reigns. Carlo had a real long reign. And
right.
Guys like that, Joe Bonanno and these guys who were just simple guys, they had a really, really, really long reign. And when you act like Paul, you end up exactly where he ended up.
Right. And Gotti too. I mean, he was very flashy and certainly did not shy away from the media attention. In fact, he went towards it. And I say to this day, I think that's the reason, a big part of the reason why the feds went after him as hard as they did, because they didn't like the fact that he was so public with it, that he was showing everybody, hey, look, I can get away with this. I'm a crime boss and I'm living high on the hog and I can get away with it and nobody can touch me. And I really believe that that's why, they with Rico and all the things that they did to bring down the mob. I think that was a huge part of it. And maybe if Gotti, if it wasn't Gotti, maybe if it was Frankie DeCicco, maybe things would be different today, and they'd still be, they'd still have some of the power that they used to have. Who knows? But to me, that was a big part of why I believe why they went so hard after them.
Yeah, it starts becoming an embarrassment to the authorities. So when you see a guy who's and John wasn't the kind of guy that didn't want you to know who he was. John was a proud boss.
Sure.
John Gotti wanted you to know, I'm the boss of the Gambino family. And he was not hiding it. Hey,
No.
I'm boss. It's your job to improve. Whatever I do is up to you. I live my life. You live your life. You do what you got to do as investigators. I do what I have to do as a crime boss. So John wasn't a money guy. He's probably might be one of the least wealthy guys of his rank of boss.
He's spreading around, yeah.
Yeah, he made money as boss, but he gambled it away and bought nice suits, but he really wasn't like a money guy, but he wasn't a modest guy. He wasn't he was out front the way Paul was out front with his mansions and his cars and his John was out front with his personality. Yeah. And you start offending, you start having meetings in the FBI and in the law enforcement saying, this guy's making a joke out of you guys. He's laughing at us in the face, and the whole public is watching a guy commit crime and do things right in our face. And what are we doing? And they start thinking, we got to take this guy down. He becomes a crown jewel. He builds a lot of careers. A lot of people are thinking, if I can take down John, I'm set for life. Remember, when you're in law enforcement, you can build a career on one big bus that has your name on it.
Mm-hmm.
So John Gleason's doing pretty well. He's touring, he's writing books, he's teaching in universities. He has a nice career
Right? He
on
does.
taking down John Gotti.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Another rule here that's fascinating is rule number 17: loyalty is a lie. Because me and Bill talk about this all the time. Who's the guy that's going to end up killing you? It's the guy who's your best friend. That's the guy who's usually going to put one in the back of your head.
You know, this is one of the controversial rules of the book because, the mob teaches honor, men of
Yeah.
honor. We are an honored society. Loyalty is everything. And we
Right.
never flip, we never tell, we never rat, we never cooperate. We show loyalty to this life. And now, so how I gather these rules, I did not think or consider anything that the mob says that we are. So I just studied the whole history, looking at not what do we say, but what do we do. And if
Right.
you look at the history of the mafia, the New York mob, from the time it came to this country and and all the way until right now, they've never showed no loyalty to nobody.
No.
Friends always killed each other, backstabbed
Sure.
each other, took each other's businesses. It's been the whole history of there's
Right.
no loyalty in that. And when you put money and wealth and power and stature in the room, there is no seating for loyalty. There's no seat where loyalty can sit down.
No, not at all. I mean, it's ridiculous. Bill, you got something before I go on?
Oh, go ahead.
So we established, I mean, the New York Commission, the five families were the most powerful, and they basically ran everything. But RJ, do you ever think there was a time, and I'm not even talking about going back to the roaring 20s with Chicago, but when Chicago takes over basically Vegas and they start running Vegas, do you ever think there was a time where the Chicago outfit was as powerful as the five families, or do you think they just didn't have enough guys to make that comparison?
No, I mean, the Chicago was on the first commission. The first commission, 31, had 7 families. Al Capone was a sitting member on the first commission. So no, Chicago was a big influence at the time. A lot of people don't really credit Chicago as much as they should be credited historically with. They helped out a lot in a lot of the New York conflicts. I mean, Al Capone was very close with Lucky, very close with the guys in Chicago. He was honored when Salvatore Maranzano was setting up the families and naming the bosses and stuff. He recognized, according to Joe Valachi, I think even Joe Bonanno said it. He recognized Al Capone for what he was in that life and what he meant to it and his contributions to it. So I would say at that point, yeah, Chicago was very, very influential. But as time moved ahead, I think Cosa Nostra became less integrated, where once guys started flipping and things like that, it made families not like less and less trusting. So of other families and things like that. So as it got later and later, it started being the 5, Philadelphia and New Jersey, Cleveland to a certain extent, maybe up in New England. But I would say at a time, Chicago was just as powerful as the Big 5 for sure.
I was
at a
thinking
time.
more of the lines of like Tony Accardo. Like when I look at Accardo, I see him as one of the smartest bosses of all time because he used front bosses and he basically, he was a major influence in that family for really almost 50 years when you look at it. And I think because he came up with Al Capone, because you look at Capone's reign, it was really short when you think about it.
It was.
And he was young. Al Capone was what was he, 24 when he actually took the reins in that gang? So, I mean, but then you look at Accardo kind of coming up under Capone, and then he learns from him. He learns the mistakes that he made being flamboyant. He kind of goes in the total opposite direction. But even like after the whole, Bugsy Siegel thing and with Virginia Hill with the casinos, Chicago runs the casinos because Chicago takes that reign and they're running it. And of course, Kansas City's a major player in that with them. And so I look at Accardo as one of the smartest bosses of all time because I don't think he ever spent a night in jail, if I'm correct.
Oh, that's true. And a lot of if you talk to most people I have spoken with that are researchers and historians, a lot of people put him down as one of the greatest, like the Mount Rushmore
Right.
of Cosa Nostra bosses, of mob bosses. Yeah.
I think you
Um,
have to.
yeah, no, I wouldn't argue it. I would never argue it at all. Absolutely. And they were more, he wasn't as like the flamboyance of Al
Oh.
Capone. He wasn't, yeah, he really wasn't. So no, I would agree with you on that for sure.
What other families do you think don't get a lot of publicity? You know, when you think about powerful families across the country, because there was almost 30 of them and the satellites and different things. But what families do you think were really powerful back in the day, but you don't hear a lot about them?
Well, the Irishman really helped to bring Buffalino
Yeah.
to his recognition point historically, because people didn't really talk about Scranton and that
Oh,
area and stuff. So, but they were an influential family. New Orleans is really one of the, I would say, arguably one of the most powerful families that people don't talk a lot about. New Orleans. Carlos Marcello was so. This guy was so influential, so powerful. Um, I would definitely say New Orleans. Philadelphia under Bruno was powerhouse family all the way back to, I mean, Philadelphia was a long time strong family. Um, of course, Detroit, people kind of talk
yes.
about them. I think like people like if you ask me about like today, I think there's like play like Detroit and Buffalo. I think they're like sleepers, like really
Buffalo. Yeah, we had an episode about Buffalo. Yeah. They
Right.
were
Buffalo,
huge.
even right now
Right.
today, I think Buffalo is a, a quiet, no one's discussing them, but I think Buffalo is like a sleeper right now.
And
Yeah.
we talked a lot about Kansas City too, RJ, on our program.
Yeah, Kansas City. I mean, at a time these guys worked. So what made the mob so powerful is how interconnected everybody was. So you couldn't run. It's like, where are you going to run? Where are you going to hide? It's almost
Right.
like that. What's that movie? Body Snatcher. It's like, where are you going to run? Where are you going to hide? There's no one like you left. When you in the mob, you didn't really interact so much with outsiders, with like legitimate. So you're from the time you was small, a little kid, so where you get your haircut at, the guy is he's on record. I mean, he's an associate of the family. The places you go eat at, the restaurants, that's where all the guys go. Your wife is a cousin to another made guy. Everything you know and know throughout your whole life is within that network. So you can try to go on the lam and run, but there's 30 families spread all over the country. You can make a phone call if a guy is a New York guy and he's on the lam and you hear, hey, I think he's hiding out in Florida. I think he's in Kansas City. You make a call out there. Hey, what guys we got out there? Keep an eye out for this guy. He's hiding out. It was so hard to. The mob was in every major city. You have to go hide in a barn somewhere like in Idaho where but you ain't going nowhere where it was a major
Right.
metropolitan area. You were going to get picked up.
Yeah.
You were
Sure.
gonna-
You mentioned Philly before. What about like after, of course, Bruno, after he gets whacked, they kind of have the reigns there, the Scarfo, which was violent reign, and then of course the Stanfa Merlino Wars. Want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, the Nicky Scarfo was the worst thing, that he was the gas pipe Casso of
Yeah.
Philadelphia. He was so brutal and so violent, and a lot of what they would call good guys in that life were killed and wiped off by him. He was so paranoid.
He's
That
the
kind
opposite
of
of Edward.
leadership never has shown. Like the really violent guys, those ain't the guys who last in the mob. Like they look at themselves as the quintessential version of what the mob is, but they're not. It's actually like the more the less violent guys, the guys who are thinkers. Those are the guys who kind of last. But guys who are shoot first, ask questions last. These really brutal guys. How many? When you start piling bodies up like that, there's an answer that has to come. There's people saying, okay, there's 20 people dead in this little area. Like, we got to find who's doing this. Um, So the Philadelphia family, in my opinion, from the time of Bruno went away, it's just been a constant downhill, just straight downhill ever since Bruno went away.
Yeah, like a perfect example would be like Roy DeMeo, the violence that
Right.
he never made it past Soldier.
The Westies.
Oh,
So you start becoming a liability to the family. You start having bodies like that, and my partner talked about this, that you're getting the chair. If you get busted, you're getting the so even in your own mind, I think a lot of guys who start getting all those bodies on them, they start knowing in their head, when they get me, they're going to get me. I can't kill all these people. People
Right.
like Sammy the Bull, that has 19 confessed. He probably has, well, he has more than 19, but he confessed to 19. You thought when you're on 19 murders, you're getting the death sentence. You're not getting out of that one. I think you start thinking years prior, when they get me, I'm just gonna flip. That's my get out of jail free card.
Right.
But Roy DeMeo, the Westies, people like that, you start becoming a liability. You have all this dirt. You have all these secrets on a lot of people. You become nerve-wracking. You did all this work for the boss. Now the boss fears you because you know all the secrets that can bring everybody down. So it's like, let's just get rid of him. He now becomes somebody who you're worried about him.
and you're bringing a lot of attention to law enforcement too.
Yeah.
We will be right back.
Hey, Sean, I want to make sure that everybody knows about our Patreon. I know we mention it every once in a while on the show, but really important that people check out our Patreon. If you go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, or just click on the link in the description, you'll find we do an extra episode every week called The Speakeasy, and it's really usually just Sean and I kind of talking about the day's events, current events, and things like that. But a lot of exciting things. I mean, I know, Sean, you're constantly putting articles up there on our Patreon.
Yeah, and sometimes, Bill, we do bring on special guests. We had Dave Whelan on, we had Scranton Dave, and every now and then we bring Patreon members on. We've had different members, Scott Alfieri, Michael Pilch, Dan Hankey was on. So, there's an opportunity there if you want to come on the show with us. So there's a lot of things we're doing. Like you mentioned, Bill, the articles. I put articles up on a free site, but I also put articles on Patreon that's not available on the free site. We have a lot of times I put up future intel about guests that we have coming up and stuff that we have coming up on the podcast. And we created a great community there, Bill. There's a lot of chat goes on there. There's a community chat and a lot of the comments back and forth. Just the Patreon members always have great insight. So it's a community, Bill, and it's an opportunity for people to join for a really good price, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, you can't beat it. You can certainly become a free member if you want to. There's also tiered levels with subscription amounts, and just for $1 that gets you everything. I mean, the $1 gets you everything, including our weekly show. There's other tiers. I think, Sean, what is there? A $3 tier?
$3, there's a $5, there's a $10. I mean, and there's a $50 if people could afford to give $50.
Yeah, I mean, totally up to you. Once you join, you can make that decision, and certainly, there's no commitment. I mean, you could join for a month or 2 months or whatever you want, and then you can switch your subscription around. Totally up to you. I mean, that's people love Patreon for that reason. It really is. It makes it easy. It's kind of however you want to do it, however you want to join, and we certainly appreciate anybody who joins our Patreon and supports the show, because we definitely Sean, we're not getting rich off of this podcast, that's for sure, but we definitely appreciate any support that we get from our listeners.
And we also have our merchandise store. If people want to check out, we have the shirt that I have on now. We have mugs up there. We have cups, hats, anything you can do to help the podcast grow. We also have a bookshop up there, Bill, where all the authors that we have on our podcast, we have their books up, and it supports local bookstores, Bill. The money goes to local bookstores, a little bit to us, and then to the publisher and to the author. So it's a real good opportunity instead of buying Amazon and making
Supporting billionaires.
Right, sure. There's an opportunity. And as far as Patreon, one last thing, Bill, if you want to join as a free member, we do put some stuff up there for the free members. And then if you like it and you want to upgrade, you can do that.
Absolutely. So definitely check out our Patreon. Like I said, there's a link in the description to our Patreon, or you can just go to Patreon and search for That's Enough Out of You, look for our logo, and just fill in the information and you can join. All right. That's it, Sean. We appreciate all of our Patreon members, and we hope that you guys will consider checking it out if you haven't joined. Thank you.
There's a couple other rules I want to talk to you about, because we covered some of them. But what about rule number 32? Bosses talk to bosses.
When people like being around their own naturally. The higher you rise in life, the more education you're getting on that way up. So, but when you're at a certain level, people, like, one of my rules in the book is like, keep your hands clean. You can't keep your hands clean when you're starting out. Everyone has to get up in the mud and, but when you start rising up, when you're a boss, you have a lot to lose. You have built up this life that is everything that you have dreamed, everything that you have worked for. And then if you're interacting with people who are so distant from where you're at, they can bring you into their nonsense. They can bring you down. So you want to what I have seen, this is one of the conflicting rules you were talking about earlier, because you want to mix with your soldiers, but to a certain extent, you have to understand they're not like you.
Right.
You have to understand where you're at to a certain extent. You're safer staying at when you're the boss, everybody wants your head. There's no, everybody wants what you got. So you're safer interacting and dealing with people who are kind of where you are, understand how you think, people who don't have so much risk going on out there. So you want to interact with people at your level, because when you dilute yourself, you're taking a risk. You could bring yourself down. At that point, you don't really want to be in the old bar no more that you used to hang out at. These are the things that can really hurt you.
You see that applied even to real life with just businesses, with corporations. You see a manager, there's a fine line between a manager hanging around with his employees and then hanging around with other managers.
There you go. And you know what? People that have nothing to lose they're dangerous to a person that has everything to lose.
Yes.
So when you're dealing with somebody, they can still, all the things you did to become boss, you don't want to do those things no more. When do you see a boss with a smoking gun on his hip going out to commit he sends the order now, because he can't risk being on the ground anymore doing that.
Exactly.
So you kind of want to be a little distance from people that have nothing to lose, and people who can, their ill deeds can bring down everything you worked for.
Right.
So,
RJ, I got a question for you, a fun question. So if you were to pick, I don't know, I guess maybe your favorite either movie or TV show, Mafia related, what would it be?
you know what's funny? People ask me this a lot, but I don't really like a lot of them. I think the best movie ever made on the subject, my favorite is Godfather 2. That's pretty good.
Sure.
Of course, we all like Goodfellas. I enjoyed that. But I never watched Sopranos. Never even watched never watched one full episode. I find, because I'm such a hard researcher, that I have spent so many years of my life looking at this. So when I was watching Alto Nights, I keep seeing Costello talking to Bobby about everything that's going on. That would never happen. You would
Yeah.
never talk to your wife or your girlfriend. He's
Yeah,
like,
you don't.
he's like, oh, I have to. You would never. She wouldn't ask though. That's the other thing. She
Right.
wouldn't be asking these questions.
Right.
She would have been kept so distant for so long that does she probably know? Yeah, but would she ask? It's a great scene in Godfather when the Al Pacino character, when Michael's like, don't ask me about my affairs.
Right.
You know, he keeps on saying that. That's the more traditional way.
Yeah.
So sometimes I see these like cheesy things in the film that would never happen. It would never ever happen.
It's yeah, interesting though, because when we had DeStefano on, he told us a little bit different. He said Bobby was she was more outgoing. She really was more of she was almost as much of a gangster as he was, you know, and he felt like it was a good depiction of their relationship.
Maybe a good depiction of their relationship being close and different things, but discussing mob business.
Yeah,
I don't think I would find that hard. First of all, you open her up to a conspiracy. You open her up to be. So a lot of times you don't want to involve when you're doing something criminal. You don't want to involve the people who you love, because even with them having the knowledge. So it's when they say in a lot of times in movies and stuff, you show that you see that scene where they say it's for your protection. It's for your protection.
Right.
So do I think he would have been discussing mob life, mob business with her? I would find that hard to believe. I'm not discounting DeStefano's his positioning, but I believe they were close and had a good relationship, but I don't think how the whole movie plays it like she's his consigliere.
Right. Right. True.
No.
And I think that applies to even like the way they, the mob bosses, the really ones, the smart ones, they don't even talk to outsiders at all. I mean, like I always said, they're masters of avoiding self-incrimination. I mean, when I hear a story of a guy who's not a made guy, not even involved in life, and he said that a mob boss told him this, or they're discussing this, like I usually just dismiss it right off, because these guys, they just don't do that. They don't survive in that life by bragging about it to everybody.
The guys that survive are the guys that, one of my rules is speak nothing, mum's the word. As a line in the book where, the only fish that gets caught is the one that opens its mouth. The less you talk, this is a general principle in life. Talkative people, they get themselves in a lot of problems. They just can't, their mouth convicts them with their friends, their family, their loved ones, and at work, rumor mills, gossip, all that stuff. But in this life, you're taught, that's one of the first things that you're taught. Shut up. Stop talking. Like, now that's why I think that the Mafia started to come down once The Godfather came out. I do believe that once the films came and you could be like, you could feel like, it's like being a basketball player and you watch LeBron and you now have something to aspire to, and you can feel good about I'm in the NBA also. Once the mob could connect their business and what they are to a commercial thing in society where the public is so, oh, look at him. Yeah. Oh, that's a real one. I think that's what started to bring the mob down, because mobsters now could feel like somebody. They wanted to be seen. The FBI was talking about that. The FBI said that once Godfather came out, it was much easier to investigate the mob. They would do stuff at night, hiding out in the dark. Once that movie came out, they'd be sitting out front having meetings. They wanted people to walk by and see them and talk to them. Yeah. So the guys later on in the 80s and stuff, they'd be in the bar telling girls, hey, I just got made. I'm in the Gambino family. That's why the life became such a joke in, the 80s and 90s. And it just continuously deteriorated because there was a pride associated with being in the mob.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Bill, you got something?
No, go ahead, Sean.
Well, the question I have, like me and Bill always talk about this, people ask, they say that, to be in the mob, you have to kill somebody, make your bones and stuff. But I think, there's always been exceptions to that, because I always think the guys that are just, pulling triggers and stuff, they don't, like you talked before, you have to have brains to rise to the level of boss. But I think a lot of guys were involved in murder, certainly. But I think some guys might have risen up without actually pulling the trigger. Do you think that? Because when I did a lot of research, is there any hits that John Gotti did himself that he actually pulled the trigger? Because even McBrantley, like, he didn't pull the trigger in that hit.
Yeah, as far as Gotti, I heard people say that John never killed nobody, but based on my research of John, talking to people who know John Sr. very much, even if you just did research on John Gotti, his ego alone wouldn't allow him to not want to say, I did some work. John Gotti he would want to do some work and be in that life and say, yeah, I've been on a hit too. He would need that. But my partner talked about it on the show when he was very close with John Sr. And he talked about a discussion with Joe Watts. And he said to Mikey Scars, he said, hey, I popped Joe Watts' cherry, meaning I took Joe Watts on his first hit. That's what Senior told that to Mikey Scars. But in our show, we discussed that he clarified very strongly. John did work. John was on hits. John committed murders.
Why do you
John
think it
told
never came
him out
out,
of his
though?
own mouth.
Why do you think it never really came out that he actually pulled the trigger and anything? Do you think it was people loyal to him, or do you think he was just so careful about the way he went about it?
Well, I don't, Henry Hill claims, and there's some ambiguity around Henry. I know people
Yeah,
think
sure.
but Henry said, and some of the rumor is that he was the guy that killed the real life Tommy DeSimone.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true, but some people say that. But I think sometimes, like Sammy said, I don't know if John ever killed somebody. He said I don't know if he ever pulled the trigger or not. But one of the street codes is you don't really talk about murder. Once you murder somebody, that's the ultimate penalty, and you go to jail for. People, the one lie John said above the Raven Knight, if you read the transcripts, he says he's talking to Sammy and Joe and Frankie Lacasio, and he says, now they killed Paul together. They know John killed Paul. And John's caught on tape saying, who knows who killed Paul? He says, probably the cops did it. Like, he says, so, but the rule of thumb typically is you don't talk about murders. Once the murder's done, you never speak about it again, even in your head. It's just something that so I don't think that John will walk around being like, hey, that one time I shot that guy in the head. So but I would say I would put any amount of money that John Gotti has absolutely killed people. Just his ego alone. I would say John pulled the trigger for sure.
You mentioned the name there that a lot of people, unless you're really a hardcore, into the mob stuff, you probably don't know that name very well. But Joe Watts wasn't a made guy, but he was a very powerful associate, close to John. Could you talk about him a little bit?
Yeah, he's one of the guys I bring up a lot on my show because, and the Cosa Nostra to be like that scene in Goodfellas when they said, it's the highest honor they can give you. It means you belong to a family. To get a button, to be a member, it was a serious thing. I mean, you worked your whole life for that. That's the crowning achievement. That's like getting your Super Bowl trophy when your whole life you wanted to be in the NFL and now you won the Super Bowl. That's the crown. Sure. To be made is at a time was a serious thing. You heard John Jr. say, my father was as proud as a father could be as if his son just made All-American. So Joe Watts, who was not an Italian and could never be made, he talked to made guys like, I'm the boss. This guy, that's how powerful Joe Watts was. Yeah, my partner Mikey Scars talks about a meeting that he had with Joe Watts and Eddie Garofalo. Now, Eddie was in Sammy the Bull's crew. And a lot of the rumors on the street was that Sammy's crew or people in Sammy's crew knew that Sammy was going to flip, that Sammy told him. So Sammy flips, but these guys are still around. Eddie was one. It was Sammy's brother-in-law. Eddie, a lot of people believe that they should have killed Eddie. They wanted to kill Eddie. Joe Watts wouldn't talk to him. He refused to speak to him. Now Eddie's a made guy. Joe Watts comes to a meeting with Michael, with Mikey Scars. Joe Watts didn't want to speak to him, but he liked Mikey. They were very close. Joe Watts sticks his finger right in Eddie's face, right in front of Michael. And he says, the only reason I'm talking to you is because of him. And told him, like, and that's a made guy you're talking to.
Made guy, yeah. Wow.
And, and that's how he told Michael one day, don't borrow money from me. Meaning, because he was a big loan, a big loan shark. But he said, because I have to do something. What he was saying is, you're my friend. I like you. If you don't pay me back now, I gotta. You talking to him. You're talking to made guys this way. He was a serious guy. When he was on the Fred Weiss murder, we did a show about this where he comes for a murder with Ferragamo shoes on, slacks, nice shirt, like has gloves on. He's like, this guy was such a professional in that life that he was just a guy who really was. He understood that life better than a lot of made guys understood it.
Now, a lot of ways to get respect. Well, the two best ways to get respect in that life is to be a ferocious killer or to be a earner. And do you think Joe Watts got that kind of respect because he was both, or do you think it was just more because he was such an earner that he got that type of respect, or do you think it was just the network, the connections he made?
One of my rules is build relationships. That's one of the, building relationships will take you further than being an earner, and it will take you further than being a vicious killer.
Right.
So Joe Watts was great at building relationships with the right people, and he got very close with John. I don't think Joe Watts loved John Gotti the way Jackie Knowles loved John Gotti. I think Joe Watts was more. He knew how to maneuver pieces. He was an engineer of men. He knew how to, be perceived. I talk about this in the book. You can be a cutthroat, drug dealing liar, but you can't be that perceived. You can't be perceived that way to your boss. You have to be, your boss needs to trust you. Your boss has to think, no, he's a stand-up guy. A lot of times these guys are not, but they know how to have you believe that they are. I think Joe Watts was just really good at building. He was very close with John. John loved him. They were very, 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 very close. You get that close to the boss, you're like a boss yourself. So Joe Watts knew, I can go to John for anything. Remember, there was a meeting in Bensonhurst with Junior Gotti after John's off the street. And Joe Watts is coming. There was rumors going around about Joe, and Joe Watts is coming to the meeting. And he didn't really trust the guys, and that these guys are going to try to kill me. He pulls up in a limousine in a residential neighborhood. I think he knew why. I'm going to make sure everybody in this neighborhood sees this big stretch limo outside his little apartment. And now these guys can't do anything up in this meeting,
Wow.
So, but Junior was upset by some of the monies and different things, and they wanted to have a meeting about. And Joe Watts told Junior, "Listen, your father gave me permission to do this. Your father told me to build a war chest up to help fight these cases. So this is why I'm collecting these monies." And Joe Watts he knew how to make money. He knew how to work with people. He knew how to move people the way he wanted to move them. It's like Meyer Lansky in many ways. Meyer Lansky was a Jewish guy but he was more powerful. Once the boss needs you,
right? Good point.
That's when you're in a good position. In business school, when I was in business school, they used to teach that you have to learn to manage your boss. Part of you have to learn the character traits of your boss. The more your boss is dependent of you, the stronger position that you're in. Make yourself irreplaceable. Joe Watts had a skill that you can't just knock me off. They can't kill Meyer Lansky. You think those Italian guys wanted some Jewish guy controlling all their bank accounts, setting up Swiss accounts for them and all this stuff? He became untouchable.
Yeah, exactly. Would you say Jimmy Burke was kind of that way too?
He wasn't Lansky or Watts, in my opinion. Some would argue differently.
Okay.
Because see, Jimmy Burke had a good relationship with Paul Vario.
Yeah.
And he was a captain. He was close at that level of like in that group where he was around. But Joe Watts was up where the bosses were at. He was all the way. A lot of people think because how they produce Goodfellas that like Paulie was the boss. He wasn't he was the captain of a crew. That movie focuses on a crew. It ain't the whole family. Like, I mean, Joe Watts was up there with the top guys in New York.
Why do you think Hollywood never caught on to Joe Watts? Because did you see the HBO movie Gotti? Like they mentioned Joe Watts in that movie, but they never show him or never.
Yeah. You know, I think the next great, that's funny you brought that up because there's certain characters that you could make a really great movie out of. And Joe Watts is one of them. And I think Hollywood will catch up to that at some point where a guy like that, they'll make a movie. Like he's like Bugsy Siegel to a certain extent. Like, you know, another person, he's probably more like, he's the 80s version of Bugsy Siegel, I would say. Because Meyer Lansky wasn't like deadly like Bugsy Siegel was. Bugsy was a big earner and he was a nut. He'll kill you in 1 second. Joe Watts was a big earner and he'll kill you in 1 second. So he's more like a Bugsy Siegel than he is a Meyer Lansky.
Good point.
Yeah.
So this is fantastic, RJ. I know we kept you here over an hour, but is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't discuss? Anything in the rules? Any of the rules that we didn't touch on that you wanted to discuss?
No, like, you know, truly, you know, I read a lot of mob books and a lot of the mob history centric books, they're like historical accounts or they're a profile on a particular mobster. I think what makes my book unique and just one of its kind, and I don't mean to sound like I'm lacking humility or I'm beating my own drum, but I don't know of any other book that's been published that explores the psychology of a mafia boss, that explores the behaviors and the strategies and the how to rise to power concepts. Like, so this book really will show people a different angle of, you can read about John Gotti in 100 books. You can read about mob history in 100 books. But if you want to understand kind of more of the psyche, the psychological element of I would say this is the first ever like psych book on Cosa Nostra. I don't know of any other one that exists. So it really will. If you guys read it, you guys know that it doesn't read like any other mob centric book that I have read. So, you know, I would encourage people who have any interest in this subject. I think they will find it as an interesting read.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, RJ, Roger, thank you so much. The book is The Don, 36 Rules of the Bosses, and we have it up on our bookshop, like Sean mentioned. You can get it there. We really
if I ship you guys 2 hardbacks that are signed, and you guys want to give them out to your readers or something?
Sure. That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, so I'll ship you, if you just email me your mailing address, I'll put 2 autographed copies in the mail, and you can give them out you can pick 2, give them out as prizes or something.
Okay,
Definitely.
we can do that.
Great.
That's fantastic, buddy. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, RJ, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We really appreciate you coming on and spending time with us.
Thank you.
All right. That's Enough Out of You podcast is executive produced and written by Bill Rader and Sean Kane and edited by Bill Rader. The That's Enough Out of You podcast and logo are exclusive property of Bags of Chicken, LLC. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or accounts of this podcast without the express written consent of Bags of Chicken, LLC is prohibited. So don't even try it.